to this virtual conference. Duane, the next.
Hi, I'm Duane Hovorka. I'm the Agriculture Program Director at the Isaac Walton League of America. We're a national conservation organization that's been around for about 98 years now. And a lot of my work focuses on agriculture and on the impacts of agriculture on water quality and on climate change and on wildlife. And I live in Gaithersburg, Maryland.
Awesome. Okay, let's have Liz Smith next.
Felipe?
Hello.
No.
I'm Liz Smith, and I'm with the International Crane Foundation, and I'm the North America Program Director and the program leader for the Texas work that we do. And the International Crane Foundation has been working on saving cranes worldwide. All 15 species we're involved in with our partners. And our specific work is on one of the 2 species of cranes in the Western Hemisphere and in North America, the sandhill crane and the whooping crane. And the whooping crane being the rarest crane in the world. And so although I work on this single species, it's really about an ecosystem that they require in the wintering grounds along the coast of Texas. And so a lot of our work deals with habitat conservation and restoration. And we are really, really strongly involved in working with landowners and connecting them with options to be able to maintain their economic welfare on these ranches and farms, but also to help conserve this habitat and it be a resilient part of our coast.
All right, thank you. Let's have Linda Brown next.
Hi, I'm Linda Brown. I'm from Lincoln, Nebraska. It's a city of about 300,000 people. I came to climate change work later in my life, and I'm wanting to send the message that no matter what you can do, that's a starting point. Respect the science and just get in there and do what you can. We can't all do, none of us can do it all, but we can each do a little part. And so I'll want to talk a little bit about that, what we've been able to do in Lincoln.
Awesome. Okay, Felipe next.
Hello, my name is Felipe Chavez Ramirez. I had the pleasure of working, I guess, with most people that are here in different ways and forms. Currently, I'm a lecturer at the University of Houston, teaching mostly ecology, environmental science, and a few related issues. Conservation has always been an important part of my work, and that led me to have to consider climate change as a factor in a lot of different things. So that's what I'm teaching a lot of issues regarding what we call the Anthropocene now, like what kind of period are we living in? Well, it's so influenced by humans that, you know, there's so many discussions about we should call this period something that shows that the influence is not, you know, past climates, it's humans. It's what we do that has led to all these changes in species loss and degradation of the environment and things of that sort. So I hope that we can try to push that philosophical angle at least a little bit in regards to, you know, we're calling the epoch we live in the Anthropocene because we are defining it in a negative way, but we can also define it in a positive way moving forward. And I hope that this group can help the younger part of the audience see things that way.
Right, thank you very much. So Dr. Gill, would you like to start with your presentation?
Okay, yes. I have where are my slides here? Okay, wait a moment. They are gone now. What happened? Wait a moment, one more time. Wait a moment. They were here, open, and now. Okay. You said that you gave me the option to share my screen. Okay. Okay, share.
Yes.
Let's see. I don't know. Okay. Well, first of all, I like this presentation, the idea of this, the title of this conference, Listen to the Earth. And you know, I was thinking about this title, and it's like when we listen to our body, no, when we have something that is not working well in our body, we have our organs, our physiology, we start feeling something wrong, like, okay, our heart, or we have an illness, and it's an indicator. We have an organ that if we have fever, we have something, we have an infection, or we have something that is not working right. That's why we need to pay attention to what is happening and listen to our body. And when I put the connection of this title with Listen to the Earth, I always say to my students that, you know, ecologists, we are kind of the physicians of the world, because it's like we pay attention to what is wrong and we go to the place and we analyze that. In my life experience is, if we consider the whooping cranes like one of these organs, like something is an indicator what is happening with this species that, you know, they were almost extinct. Well, I had the opportunity when I developed my research on the PhD to make the connection, all the changes in the climate with the whooping crane population. That was kind of my contribution. And the surprise is that I found this connection with what is happening, how the population was going up and down during many years because of the climate. And the slide that I'm presenting to you is this, okay? So today, I can just talk about the whooping cranes, but in the future, and that's why it's the interesting part of this first conference. In the future, this up and down could be humans, could be agriculture, could be many other factors that we are depending on. You see? That's why I wanted to share with you this. This color, this is called the Pacific Decadal Oscillations, which is similar to the ENSO. Several of you know about the ENSO because it's part of the content in our class. And this, when you see blue or red, this is what we call cold years or bad years, because it's extreme temperatures, and this is good years. What I found is that a beautiful correlation. When we have bad years or very extreme conditions, the population suffered tremendously, and suffered in the areas of Texas and suffered in the areas of Canada. Everything is connected, everything. So what a beautiful way to show you that, yes, whatever is happening to the population of animals, migratory animals, is going to be reflected. We have data for 60 that, yes, they depend of this. And in the same way, we humans, we depend of the same. So that's my contribution here and my comment. If we have species that are indicators of changes due to the climate change, we are the next. So we need to pay attention to and take decisions. And one of the other contributions that I want to share with you is, please consider to protect specific places like wetlands or where we have fresh water, because with this climate change, we could have more areas with less water, fresh water, okay? That is one of my, I hope that you will have beautiful flags in the future saying we have to protect these wetlands for your generations, not only for the animals, for you, okay? Because we are all connected. So I will leave
so much for that.
connected to the next.
All right, let's have Duane with your presentation next.
Well, hi, and thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity. I think Listen to the Earth is a great title, and it's really the essence of what we're trying to do at the Isaac Walton League. We focus a lot of our efforts on healthy soils in our agriculture program because that soil health is really so important to protecting water quality, the soil health practices like planting cover crops in the winter and things really help wildlife, but also because healthy soils are really important in terms of climate change. And when people think about climate change, you think about greenhouse gases. So you think about carbon dioxide, and primarily that's coming from burning coal and oil and natural gas. And that's putting carbon that was, buried deep in the earth up into the atmosphere. And that's a big chunk of the problem that we have. So I don't want to minimize that. But what often gets lost is that about 20% of the excess carbon that's in the atmosphere came from our soils over the last 10,000 years when humans started plowing and tilling and managing the soils. It released a lot of the carbon that's naturally stored in those soils. And some of that comes through erosion when we have bare ground and water runs off and carries the soil with it. It tends to separate the carbon, which is that like the plant materials and the roots and those kinds of the chemicals, the exudates that come from plants that are in the soil get separated from the sand, silt, and clay. But also tilling the soil can release the carbon into the atmosphere. And so about 20% of that excess carbon that we have in the atmosphere is come because of agriculture, because of what we've been doing for the last several thousand years. We see it here in the United States. Since colonial times, we've lost about half of our topsoil to erosion. And it continues today. We're doing a better job now of managing erosion, but we're still losing it a lot faster than it can be replaced. And that's a real concern when we think about growing food in the future with more people on the planet and less topsoil. And if you look at the topsoil, at the soil that remains, we in the United States have lost about half of the organic matter, and that organic matter is mostly carbon. So it's roots, it's other plant materials that are in the soil. We've lost about half the organic matter since colonial times in the soil. So all of those are contributing both to a loss of productivity of our ability to grow food, but it's also putting carbon up into the air and making climate change worse. Agriculture also contributes to methane. When ruminants like cattle and sheep eat grass, their first stomach processes that grass and you get burps. So they burp methane. And it's funny, some of it comes out the other end, but most of the methane is actually a fairly significant source of one of the climate gases that's helping drive climate change. And the other problem we have is the nitrogen oxides. So when we put nitrogen fertilizers on the soil, we put a lot of nitrogen fertilizers on the soil, and we also till the soil, plow it, and that releases that nitrogen into the air. And so nitrogen oxides, NOx, is also one of the other climate gases that comes from agriculture. And agriculture is a fairly significant source of that kind of greenhouse gas. So that's part of the problem. What we work on at the Isaac Walton League is to try to help drive policies that help farmers do a better job of putting in place practices that conserve the soil, that build soil health. And when you have healthy soils, those soils through photosynthesis are taking carbon dioxide out of the air, they're combining it with water, and they're creating sugars, carbohydrates, and those carbohydrates feed the plants, but they also get pumped by the plants down into the soil. So you get healthier plants, you get healthier soil. Those carbohydrates, those sugars that get pumped into the soil feed healthy bacteria and mycorrhizal fungi, the fungi down in the root zone. And they also help keep those plants healthy. and they provide more carbon into the soil. So that's the kind of natural processes that we'd like to stimulate on America's farms and ranches to help rebuild the healthy soil in our farms and ranches. And what we're trying to do at the League, working with a lot of partners, is try to push forward and promote public policies at the federal and state and local level that help farmers do a better job of managing their farmland, of managing their livestock, so we can rebuild those healthy soils. That makes them more resilient to climate change. At the same time, it helps take some of those climate gases out of the air, take some of that CO2 out of the air and put it down in the soil.
All right, thank you very much. Let's have Liz Smith next.
Okay, well, as I mentioned that these whooping cranes winter along the Texas coast, this is the last sustaining population of whooping cranes. We have 2 reintroductions that are going on to try to augment some of that recovery, but we do have the last ones. And so what happens on the Texas coast is really imperative to the successful recovery of this species. As we have watched this bird decline to less than 20 birds in the 1940s to about 500 now, that sounds like a really great scenario. However, the downlisting goal is at 1,000 birds and 250 nesting paired, just to downlist from endangered to threatened. And there have been several scientific studies of which Dr. Gill was leading in, which was how soon can we get to this recovery goal. And it's hard to say because we don't know everything about the species as it continues to expand. It needs a lot of habitat. If you think about a square mile of marsh, let's say, that would only support 2 families of cranes. And so when we look at 250 nesting pair just to downlist, we need over 125,000 acres of habitat marsh, and also the adjacent prairies and freshwater marshes along the coast, over 300,000 acres in order to support this recovering population. So we have a great network of federal refuges and state wildlife management areas along the coast. However, that's not enough. And so it's not really economically feasible or even a good idea for us to think we need to put all of this into some kind of federal or state protection. In the first place, the landowners that have this property have a strong land ethic. Many of them are heritage farmers and ranchers that came here in search of a better place and have multi-generations that have these large ranches along the coast. The importance of that adjacent prairies and marshes and working lands is that as sea level rises, the marshes will move, upland and inland. And so while we protect what we try to protect what we need now, we also need to protect for the future. And so there's been several models that have been developed, and the first one that was actually completed was completed by myself and other partners in the coast, and including Dr. Chavez. And we talked about how we needed to identify these areas that were going to have the most contiguous, the most connected marshes and prairies in the landscape. Now there's other models that have been completed, but what you really can look at is elevation. And so much of the Texas coast is below 20 feet elevation. The coast of Texas is 330 miles long, but the inland shorelines is over 3,300 miles. And so, this is an area that gets inundated by storms. It is an area where when we do have a storm and we have a high storm surge, as we've all experienced along the coast, that this salt water goes much further inland. And so there's a lot of habitat that rarely gets any salt water that can have the storm surge come in and actually affect the way the plants, what plant composition we have into the future. So how does this affect a working land is that if you are managing this land for cattle, or if you are using it for farming, if you are using it for rice farms, that when this land gets inundated with this salt water, it stays in the soil and it changes the way that you can use that land. So when I first started working in this effort, sea level was probably about 18 inches lower. And yet the difference in that time period has been phenomenal on the landscape. So those that felt that sea level, that climate change and sea level rise, well, do we really need to worry about that? It's been a real eye opener for people that, grew up on the coast and said, we had a house, we had a pier, we had a dock, and all of that is near the water line. It's getting hammered by these storms, et cetera. So we know that sea level is rising, and yet we continue to develop the coast. So as these farms and ranches are no longer able to use this land, it is oftentimes bought up by developers, and many times they're not from the state of Texas. And so people come in, they want to live on the coast, and they want, we certainly all want to be by the water. And so, but they're vulnerable to these storms. And so, maintaining that edge, that shoreline that would actually extend, up into, 20, 25 foot height is important for us now from storm surge and hurricanes, but also important to us from in the future as sea level rises and we want to continue to have this coastal marsh shoreline. This is what the cranes need, but this is also what we need. We need that resilient coast that is only achievable by maintaining that natural habitat as a buffer against storm surge, as an ability to maintain the soil and the sediments, to be able to produce, a nursery habitat for all of our fisheries, of which is both recreational and commercial. And so, when we talk to people about whooping cranes, if whooping cranes are able to recover, we're able to maintain a high quality of life. The other thing that happens with these climate change is that we're going to have, we're in this funny place in the climate change models where we're either going to have, it's either going to be much drier or it's going to be much wetter. And we are already used to that on the Texas coast because it's hard to predict our weather, anywhere along the coast because of the way that we're positioned along the Gulf of Mexico and then also in a semi-arid region. So the important thing to note is that it is going to become more dramatic. And so as we look at these climate models that say we're going to have more frequent hurricanes and they're going to be higher in intensity, we're experiencing that right now. And we're also seeing that as storms come in, they don't follow a straight path. They come to the edge of the coast and they start to meander. They go inland like Harvey did, then come back out and then come back over Houston and then wreak havoc over even the states in our inlands. And so we really can see the changes, but what we haven't done is try to find out how we're going to deal with these changes. And the way that we've dealt with them in the past is not going to work. We have to have these new and innovative ways of thinking to be able to adapt to what is a changing world that, as Dr. Chavez said, it is because of us. It is happening faster and it's more dramatic because of our actions. So a lot of, different type of deep think tank, dialogues have to occur. And so what you're doing in your classes, it isn't just the science, it's in business, it's in our economics, it's in how we deal with our social sciences and how we take care of our communities, that everyone has to be involved in this dialogue. So it's easier for us to talk about the generalities of what's happening along the Texas coast that includes people than it is to target on whooping cranes. So I think that the whooping crane is one of those species that as more people find out about it and know about it and value what they need, that we're going to make increase awareness to advocacy. And so, we encourage, all of us to sit down and have these dialogues together, because I know what I think I know, but I want to hear what other people know and their approaches. And so, it has to be integrated. And as we discuss, ecology, we have to discuss economy, because many times what we want to preserve is from a conservation standpoint. That habitat actually needs to provide ecosystem services, things that people value, in order for us to get everyone behind maintaining this natural habitat and this resilient coast.
All right, thank you so much for that insight. Moving on the same topic of like integration of, the different sectors of our society, like environment, economy. Let's hear from Felipe more of this.
Well, first of all, let me thank the organizers and congratulate you on trying to get other people interested, knowledgeable, hopefully understanding what the different issues are. I mean, we talk about problems a lot, and of course it's good because some people don't even know that we have certain problems. So it's also important but it's important to take the next step. And I hope that by starting to learn about the problems at a younger age, when you guys get to our age, you'll have the solutions to some of these problems. So hopefully venues like this can help you folks try to push the envelope a little more. So let me talk about a couple of things. One is we live in a time where we're redefining terms, we're redefining what we call things. There's terminology that I'm sure everybody knows, like everybody knows what deforestation is, I'm sure. We hear it, it's a common term used in everyday language, but how many people know what defaunation means? Does anybody know? What does that mean? The students out there know what that means?
Maybe not.
Okay, so we're losing species at incredible rates, animal species as well. It's not just we're knocking down, the rainforest in Brazil. We're losing species at an incredible rate of about anywhere between 11,000 to 30,000 a year. And we don't hear as much, it's happening. It's been happening on for several decades now. And we're not even as aware of that potential problem as we should be. 12% of the bird species are threatened by human direct activities. 20% of mammals, about 30% of amphibians and reptiles are impacted by human activity, and their populations are now threatened or endangered as well directly to human activity. So we're doing a lot of damage. Some of it's indirect. Obviously, we destroy a forest, we're destroying the place where some of these animals live. But we're also changing the conditions excessively, and that has impacted a lot of particularly big mammals, big birds, but even smaller animals are now beginning to be impacted as well. Reptiles and amphibians are one of those groups that are severely, particularly amphibians, because they're much more sensitive to water quality and things of that sort. And we are obviously destroying those situations. So as we think about climate change and all the issues associated with it, thankfully we have a very good record of climate that goes about 800,000 years back. Thanks to the glaciers and ice that have been cored, we can literally look at the amount of CO2 in the air and get a very good idea for what temperatures might have been going hundreds of thousands in the past. So, when we talk about climate change and people going, well, it's always gotten cold and hot in the past. That's true, but we've never had the concentration of CO2 that we have now, ever, at least going back 800,000 years ago. So that has to do, CO2, why is it so high? Well, it's us. It's humans that have caused some of these changes in such a short period of time. So that has led to what I mentioned early on, to initiatives, discussions, in trying to redefine the period we live in, the epoch. If you guys are familiar with the geological timescale, we have events that have made us change from one period to another, like a meteorite hits the planet, causes severe extinctions all over the world. So we switch from one time period in the planet to another one. Well, if we look at human activity, we have cause incredible changes. We just look at temperature, CO2 concentrations related to human activities. We see that the changes that have occurred in the last few decades is related to us. So this idea of calling the Anthropocene is not official part of the geologic record yet, but there's so much initiatives that, yes, I mean, it's pretty clear that the big significant changes in deforestation, defaunation have to do with humans. So all this climate change is related to what we do and don't do. So to me, it's both good and bad, because the fact that we have to define a period of the Earth's history on human activity, negative human activity, unfortunately, is kind of sad, right? But the fact that we bring it up and actually recognize that fact, then that means that we can do something about it. And I think even so far, people who have talked have expressed that idea that we can do something about it, and we should. So we have to understand what the problem is. You know, the biggest problem we have right now with defining the Anthropocene is, when does it start? Or when did it start? And when and how and when do we officially make it? You know, one of the issues that has been brought up is like exactly what Duane mentioned, is the initiation of agriculture started snowballing effects. Pretty minor back in those days, but it's clear that something started with the development of agriculture. We also can go back to the 1960s, and we see this incredible jump in CO2 and in temperature and things like that. So where do we start the Anthropocene? You know, the beginning of agriculture, or the beginning of these super rapid changes in an air quality caused to industrialization, you know, human activity, or things of that sort. So that has a big impact. So trying to define the beginning of the Anthropocene is a very interesting scholarly idea, because anybody can start to look at trends and data and try to see, where should we start the Anthropocene? Basically, where does human impact become so significant on the planet that we have to call it that? We have to acknowledge that. We have to say, you know, it was 1628, or it's 1962, whatever the case may be. And it'd be an interesting exercise to see if different individuals could come up with a different metric. It's like, I think it should be 1965, I don't know, whatever the case, when the big jump in temperatures began, or something like that. But it's very clear that we are intertwined, we're tied in to what's happening here. And just for reference, you know, we have anywhere between 10 million, if you want to go up or down a few million species on the planet. We're losing about 11,000 to 50,000 a year. You know, at that rate, we're worse than the meteorite that caused the extinctions of the dinosaurs, when you think about it in those numbers. We've never had, you know, when I talk to people that are perhaps not as educated in ecology and things like that, so they always talk, well, extinction is a natural process. It's like, true, you know, more than 90% of the species that have lived on the planet are not here with us. That's right. But the rate of extinction has never been so rapid. You know, I'm sure the meteorite did it, right, very quickly in a short period of time. But then we're doing it without even these catastrophic events. But the catastrophic event is, once we stop killing everything to eat it, is now our indirect impact on the climate and how that impacts plants and animals and everything that goes on beyond. So we have to recognize that. I hope you guys at least think about that issue, that, you know, it's our actions. It's literally what we do, how our governments act or don't, that is snowballing into this phenomena that is, to me, it's always to think about this giant meteor that hit the earth and caused the extinction of 90% of the species. And we're doing the same thing. I mean, consciously almost, in a sense, because we know it's happening. We've been documenting loss of species, you know, for decades and millennia now, and we're still not doing much about it, you know. People here, we have worked on at least one species a great deal, if you look at least a big part of this panel. And that's just one species. If you look at the amount of hours and money and resources that have gone, it's just one species. And then there's thousands out there that need support, help, just information, you know, what's going to happen. And well, if you're interested in conservation at this point in time, you know, in the past, when I was young, let's say, like some of you are, we talked about preserves and how do we protect land and pieces of landscape so animals can live and be happy. You know, that was kind of an interesting issue. Should we have a big reserve or several small reserves? Well, none of that's relevant now because it doesn't matter if it's a big reserve or 10 small one or 1,000 small ones. If the climate is so different that it doesn't matter what we do in the landscape, it's still going to deteriorate. It's still going to suffer because we're changing the climate that it impacts everything else. So species respond to temperature. You know, every plant and animal has a range of tolerances for temperature, humidity. And as we change those in the planet, you know, species move up and down on latitudes on our Earth. They expand or contract depending on what we do. And then there's indirect impacts of, you know, their food resources and how those are impacted by all the actions that we are doing. So just hope that you think about uh, how significant our role is. You know, most people, and one of the things I like about teaching environmental science for some non-majors, let's say, is that they didn't realize how many problems we have regarding the environment, and that just driving a car more than you should can have an impact down the road. Or we're lucky here in Texas, of those of you that are not here, that we can select where our electricity comes from. So I can, for example, in my home, I only get 100% renewable energy, supposedly, right? So we can make choices in our everyday lives that we can, over the long run, can make very significant impacts. And we have to, you know, we have 12 years according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. If we don't want to get to catastrophic that precipice, we get 12 years to make radical changes to what we do to decrease the amount of CO2 that is going into the atmosphere, or we're not going to be able to reverse some of the changes that we're causing on our planet. So think about that. You know, 12 years is almost nothing in the whole scheme of things, but you can do something every day. You can make a big impact. You can educate people like you're doing today. That's a start. And then some of those people will decide to accomplish some of their own and try to push elected leaders to do something on their side of things. And if we all do a little bit at a time, then we'll be able to make real significant change. So apparently, in order to avoid that big jump from 1.5 degree change in climate to 2 degree change in climate, we need to do that now. Because once we go past the 1.5 degree increase in climate or temperature, it's going to lead to catastrophic events no matter what we do after that. And so we got 12 years to really avoid reaching that 1.5 versus 2 degree increase in temperature. And so it's really pressing and it's serious. And some people just look at it as, you know, like the weather in Nebraska, I guess, where, yeah, it's hot today, but it'll be cold tomorrow. So I can't do anything about it. But we can, you know, we can make a big difference. So we have to try. So think about it. And I'm sure a lot of the questions that will be coming up will deal with more specific issues. So I'll leave some of that for a little later on. So that's basically it. I just want you to think. What you do has a big impact to such a degree that we now have a geological time period that should be named after us because of our negativity. I hope in the future we can have a different Anthropocene 2, for example, kind of like the Carboniferous 1 and 2 of the past, where Anthropocene 1 is the bad period of human action, and Anthropocene 2 will be the period of positive human action on our planet. So that would be something to strive for. So thanks, and thanks again to the organizers for putting something like this so interesting.
All right, thank you for the optimistic perspective at the end. Okay, let's hear from Linda next. You're on mute.
Thank you, Mariana. Thank you, first of all, Mariana, for putting this together. And Karine, thank you. And all of you panel people that I have known in Nebraska or through Paul Johnsgaard. I don't know, Liz, we really haven't met, but George Archibald is a dear friend from the International Crane Foundation. You are doing wonderful work with keeping cranes in this world. Thank you so much. I look at Felipe and think about probably 15 years ago when we first met to work on the Platte River Cooperative basin project to try to keep water in the Platte River. And Felipe, as an environmentalist, this is something he was doing in Nebraska at that time, was bringing together leaders from the state of Wyoming and Colorado and Nebraska to see if we could come to some agreement on how we could keep enough water in the Platte River to be able to support our endangered species, the whooping crane and the least tern, or the piping plover, I should say. I look at Duane and wish you were back in Nebraska, but I'm so glad you're with Isaac Walton. I want to report that Deb Fisher, one of our senators in Nebraska, very Republican, has just signed on to be a co-sponsor for a bill that's in Congress, or in the Senate, I should say, Growing Climate Solutions, to help sequester carbon into the soil by giving incentives to farmers to be able to cost out the value of leaving cover crops on their land, you know, to hold that organic material on their land, which improves the soil, it improves the water quality. So to get her to sign on to a bipartisan bill, I mean, that's a real step. And we celebrated that in our Wachiska Audubon newsletter in December, because to get our legislators to a point where they are acknowledging climate change and wanting to be part of the solution is a big deal. And Karine, your work with whooping cranes, I'll never forget sitting in a conference out on the Platte River in Kearney, Nebraska, where you were describing using like ancestry diagrams to diagram the family structure of whooping cranes, and you knew which whooping cranes had had divorces and which ones had died. I mean, it was what an eye-opener to have people so close to their species, if you will, to have that information. And Liz, my trip to Aransas came 6 months after Hurricane Harvey hit in August of 2017. And when we drove into Rockport, I was just aghast at the damage that was still apparent. I mean, there were houses that had just had the walls blown out and they were still standing. I mean, it was so obvious that the damage that had been repaired were probably people that had paid for insurance. And it looked to me like a lot of people just hadn't had insurance. There was all sorts of debris that had been brought into the islands between the eastbound and westbound interstate highway. I don't know if that was for sorting purposes or what. And they were still advertising that there would be more debris collections that following weekend. I mean, the damage to the human community down there, why would anyone want to be building down there in that habitat? And yet, what we were discovering with the cranes, and you helped me out with the whooping cranes, we were told that the hurricane actually brought more water. The whooping cranes weren't there at that time. They were still on their breeding grounds, as I understand it. But it brought in more fresh water that was good for the wolfberries that they fed on and the blue crabs. You might want to comment on that a little bit more too, but I just look at you and I think of all the work that you're so involved in. And then I want to just share a little bit of my own story. I told you I came late to climate work about the time that one of my friends, Marilyn McNabb, retired. She said to me, Linda, I have decided that the single most important thing I need to do with my time, the time I have left, is work for the climate. Well, that got my attention. she invited me to go to a training session for Citizens Climate Lobby. And so I went because Marilyn McNabb was starting that organization in Lincoln, Nebraska, and I respected her. I came away from that 2-hour meeting having a far better understanding of what was happening with the climate and why we needed to come up with some solutions. And the one solution that Citizens Climate Lobby works on is talking to legislatures to find solutions, and their solution is to put a neutral carbon fee on every ton of carbon dioxide that is burned from coal and gas and oil, and at the source. So the electric company gets in their train load of coal, and for every carload of coal, like, we know how much carbon dioxide will be put into the air, and then they pay a fee, and then every year that would increase till we got some result. And I like to look at climate modeling things. It looks to me like right now they probably has to get up to about $50 a ton. I might be wrong, and every model is different. But I went away from that meeting because we practiced with each other, talking to our senators and our representatives, and I went away from there thinking, hey, I can do that. I can write letters to the editor. And yes, we need to change the political will, because if all the people in our communities believe that we're just going to burn up if we don't do something, we will make better decisions, and we will influence the people that are in the forefront of those decisions. So at that point, I started writing letters to the editor. You can only write one every, I don't know, I think it's like 55 days. Maybe I just figure every 2 months, they'll let me slip in another letter. And so that was my little start. I also worked with the Green Sanctuary Committee at my church. And this is a really interesting group of people. One person, Kurt Donaldson, got geothermal into all the public schools in Lincoln, Nebraska, the town that's about 300,000 people. So that's a lot of schools. We probably have a couple more that, haven't switched over to geothermal yet. But they've done a fair amount of studies, and we know that it's cost effective. We know we're not putting carbon dioxide in the air. And that's one thing that Kurt has done. Well, when our church went into a renovation program, expansion and renovation, about 5 or 6 years ago, we were going to move out of the church space for a year. And the Green Sanctuary people had a lot of impact. Now, I'm telling you this because I think we all have a lot of impact if we know what we're working for. And so that group, we got in geothermal. We have 17 geothermal wells under our parking lot that are 300 rods, fluid-filled rods that are 300 feet long, that transfer heat back and forth summer and winter for heating and cooling of the church. We also put on 96 solar panels on our roof, so we get help from solar. We've increased our space significantly, but we've not increased our electrical costs. We, of course, put in LED lighting and insulation and all that other stuff. But what I'm saying is a small group of people can influence a whole community. One time I had the 5th graders go out in the parking lot and census the cars in the Unitarian parking lot and the ones across the street in the Episcopal Church parking lot. Well, there were so many more hybrid and electric cars in the Unitarian parking lot that I can't believe that. I mean, I do believe that we influence each other. And I invite you to think about that when you express your values to each other. This group that I work with at the Unitarian Church, the Green Sanctuary Committee, decided some years ago that we would focus on Lincoln Electric System. Some of us have been going to the wind and solar conferences in Lincoln, and really wanted to encourage Lincoln Electric to become more sustainable. Now they were touting about 48% sustainable electricity. And by that, I mean what they are producing from their plants. We belong to a Southwest public power pool. So, where you're really getting it from is a little bit of a mix, a lot of a mix. But as far as the inputs, they were saying we were about 48%. Well, I mean, we've been in dialogue. We've had people on the board. Just this past 2 weeks, Lincoln Electric has announced that they are going to go for 100% carbon free. I mean, it's more than sustainable. It's a combination by 2040. That's their goal. Well, we are celebrating. I mean, there is a way to change the political will within our communities, and we just all need to take a piece of it. But I also want to say, don't kill yourselves and think you have to do it all, because none of us can. We can only do part of it. That's my piece.
All right, thank you. It's so nice to hear about all the stuff you were able to accomplish within your community. So yeah, we loved hearing that. Thank you. So let's go over a few questions or discussion questions. So the first one and this goes for any of the panelists, you're welcome to answer. Has there been a moment in your life, solo or collaborative, and at work or in your community, when stubborn optimism and determined action led to much needed change? And I know Linda Brown definitely touched on this subject, but you're welcome. Anyone's welcome to answer.
I'm trying to think. That's such an interesting question, because I wish that there was one thing that popped up. It seems like one success leads to another level, and then you approach that level, and then you have that success and you go, but that's not enough. We need to go to the next level. And I think I feel most like we're on the right track and successful when we're working as a team. And so that you're not responsible for having all of the answers, and you are not also pushing your particular opinion as the way that we should move forward. So I feel the best when we're able to get interest, like this morning, for everyone to come together, to further that, that collective wisdom and entrepreneurship that we need. I've already learned a great deal and have some great ideas. I'm going, I really need to move faster on this. I think the most recent moments were, as was mentioned, was after the hurricane, was that it was just really, really a tough place to live. And we lost so many people that just couldn't, even if they had the means to recover their homes, they just said, I can't live this way, and actually moved far, far away. I mean, not just to San Antonio. I mean, they left. And so when we first went out after the hurricane, we took some people out, and we could finally get the boat ramps cleared and everything. And we did want to see how the marsh was doing and what things looked like. And when we got out there and were in that environment, and it was just scrubbed clean, it was just amazingly green. And this had 12 foot of storm surge over it, and all this debris. on these marshes and prairies. And as we came back to the boat ramp and we were meeting other boats that were going out too, the mood among everyone was, we can recover. If the natural environment can handle this, we need to learn from the natural environment how to rebuild. And as people were coming in, though, you faced this whole destruction again. And you felt, no, because I've been out here, I'm going to hang on. I'm going to keep that thought of that beautiful native landscape in my mind. And even people that were in other boats, we were talking to each other, and it was just like, you know, what really impressed you? And it's like, man, I think the fishing's going to be really good. Oh, I think this is going to happen. And, you know, we held on to those things, and I think that made us closer. And I was proud to be a part of that. I didn't do that, but I was there, you know, and present. So I think moments like that really give you that impetus to say, we probably shouldn't be doing the same thing over again. Yet we have, just with stronger buildings. But you know, it's a challenge to get people to realize of setting land back, getting to higher ground. Do we have to do it only by laws, or is the community going to say we're safer if we do it this way? So I think most everything I can think of that was a really shining moment was me and others being together on common ground.
All right, thank you.
I have a related topic to that, because, well, in Muslim classes where, you know, I've gotten to the point where when you talk to ecology students or natural resource students, they're already committed. You know, most of them are interested in conservation and they know some of the issues. But when you talk to a class of, or at least part of the group is non-majors, so they're coming from business and art and whatever, and you start talking about the problems and things everybody can do, and they think that they can't do things, that something they do on their own will not make any difference. And the question I get a lot is like, when I talk about simple things like recycling, I go, well, do you do it? I go, yeah, I recycle. Oh, okay. So it's like, they're saying like, well, there's all this theoretical stuff, but we're not really doing it. And they go, well, why don't you drive an electric car? I go, well, I actually drive a hybrid car. They're like, oh. And I go, and actually the power in my house is all 100% renewable energy. It's like, oh. So like, so I mean, you can do this stuff. I mean, it's not, I'm human just like you are. It's not like, you know, we're different. We just have to make a choice that we can make a difference. So an example is a good way to do this, you know, because we shouldn't follow the COVID example that we have now, where government, or, you know, elected officials are telling people to stay home and then they go travel and do things, you know. This is the same thing, you know, if we say we should and be able to do something, we should be able to show that we can do it. And if we can do it, any other human on the planet can do it. You know, it's not like, it's not rocket science, right? We're not trying to get to Mars here. We're just changing very small things in our own surroundings that altogether can make huge impacts. So I think leading by example is always a very good way to do that. You gotta be able to show that you can do it and everybody can do it. And we have to provide more of those direct examples to people.
All right, thank you. So we have another question, which is an audience question. How can we reframe the narrative and dialogue of climate change in order to bring on those who don't believe in science and get them to understand and encourage them to join the cause?
Well, that's a good one. Well, I mean, my experience is you have to at least convey the information to people that don't have access to it. You know, we know a lot, you know, this panel, because we're in this world and have been in it for a few years or a lot of years, you know, whatever the case. But it's still eye-opening to me to know that some people have never heard of things like that, like climate change and extinctions, and, you know, that we had species here in North America that are gone. It's like, what? You know, there's still people that are surprised by these things. So that means there's a lot of people that don't even know facts. And I think that's where we should start. I mean, I do believe in that saying that, if you educate people, they'll appreciate something if they learn about it. And if they learn about something, they're more willing to do something to protect it later on. I think we have a lot of examples of that in natural resources like hunting. You teach people how to hunt, they appreciate what they're hunting, even if, we view it a little different, but then they're willing to do things to protect what they like to hunt. A very simple thing that we do all over the US is that. But we don't do it for other things like protecting an endangered species, for example, or doing something that you can do at home that helps your community and your planet. So I think education is the biggest way, conveying information. But I mean education, I don't mean just a formal classroom. I mean, we can do it to the people we talk to, our friends that, that don't follow certain things. Like if I go to somebody's house, I go, if I have a can in my hand, I go, where's your recycle? I'm like, huh? Like, well, that's the trash. I go, that's the trash can. I'm talking about the recycle bin. Well, we don't have recycling. It's like, what? And then you can start educating. Okay, well, you should at least, this is so simple. You could do it right here, right in your kitchen. So a lot of little details like that you could probably take a long way.
I think Felipe is really right. Education is really critical so that people understand the science a little better, understand the issues and what's going on. And I think that it's also really important to provide solutions along with the problems. And when you think about climate change and what's changing in the world, and it can get really, really scary when you start looking out what's going to happen in 10 or 20 or 30 years. The models are frankly pretty scary. And when we see, we talk about losing species and the extinction rates, again, it's pretty scary information. And sometimes people, when they hear this, it sounds overwhelming and they just kind of shut down and they just like, I don't want to hear it. I'm going to go, watch sports on TV or something. And so I think what helps though is we know the solutions. We have solutions. We have clean energy solutions. We have soil health solutions. We have habitat solutions that will help preserve species. So we know what those solutions are. And I think it's important that when we talk about problems, we're also very positive about talking about the solutions that are out there. And I think once people see that yeah, there are solutions, we're not nearly where we need to be in terms of adopting those solutions and moving forward, but we know what the solutions are. We have the solutions in hand if we have the political will and the individual will to put them in place. And so I guess in terms of our messaging, what I try to do, and I think what we try to do, is always try to make sure that we have that message about here are the solutions. And they're in many cases good, not just for climate change, but they're also good for wildlife. They're good for water quality. They're good for our other natural resources. So that's, I think one way we help reframe the narrative is by really talking about the positive solutions that are out there to these problems.
Right, thank you so much. I really like how you mentioned like the positive aspect of it, and also how we can use climate change to as like a starting off point to start, changing the way that we get our energy from, like clean energy and things like that. So thank you. Next, what are some solutions to climate change? I know we've talked about renewable energy, but how can we kind of mobilize other sectors of our economy, like agriculture, transportation, in an effort to reduce carbon emissions and combat climate change overall?
I wanted to just throw out, I'm excited when I go to wind and solar conferences and I see how much battery storage has increased and developed in the past, say, 5 years. From when I first went maybe 10 years ago and there was almost nothing. It was like a dream. Well, now we have big complexes of battery storage so that our solar energy and our wind energy can actually be stored till times when we can use it. Okay, now on to you, Duane.
just going to jump in on agriculture, and we've learned a whole lot about soil science just in the last 5 or 10 years. And a lot of that information has not made its way out into to farmers and ranchers and the people who are actually managing those farm and ranch lands. So we know now things we didn't know 10 years ago, you know, like all the plowing and tilling is really very destructive of the soil health. And the chemicals we're using are really destructive of the biology in the soil. You know, all the pesticides that we spray doesn't just kill the insects we want to kill, it kills a lot of the good bacteria and the good fungi in the soil. And even putting on nitrogen as a food for plants, plants use that nitrogen and then they stop feeding the microbes that naturally will feed those plants. And so we're really starving the soil microbes when we put on nitrogen and phosphorus fertilizers. So, you know, I think there are ways. We now know what the solutions are in terms of agricultural problems, and a lot of it is education and providing farmers and ranchers with the scientific expertise, but also some financial help to help them make the transition to better farming and ranching systems.
Awesome. Would anyone else like to add on to that, or we can move on? All right, next question. This is another audience question. How should we go about switching from fossil fuels to sustainable energy sources?
Well, I think in our system of, I don't know what we want to call it, culture, government, we can start top down or bottoms up, right? Top down means, you know, the government puts regulations like, you know, cars can have X amount of emissions, so the companies have to adjust to that, and that's one way to do it. If there's that kind of will at the top, which we know that it's less and less, it looks like throughout, or at least the changes that they want to make or willing to make are fairly small compared to what we need to do. So the bottoms up is us. It's like, how can we influence companies? If it's not through regulations, it's through our own decision-making process and making smart choices as to we support companies or use companies that are already either working towards that goal, or we can push the markets because of our purchasing power, so to speak, to move industry towards what we want. You know, if we can show, you know, not too long ago, there was no organic vegetables in the grocery market. Why does everybody have now organic sections? Well, because people want it. They're looking for it, and they used to go to the farmers markets, you know, on Saturdays, because that's the only place to get it. Well, now they're in Kroger's and Walmart's and Safeways, wherever you want. So we can push that ourselves as well by saying, you know, why? I mean, my son asked this question a lot. Why can't we get rid of fossil fuels? Well, we have a whole infrastructure that's supporting that, and we have to say, well, we want it to change. And other countries have already made that decision to go zero, you know, fossil fuel use, you know, by 2030 or 2050 or whatever the case may be. They already made that choice at the cultural level, at the governmental level. So it can be done. I mean, it's depending on what country you are, you can start at the top or you can start at the bottom. So it's, I think we here in the US, we can have a lot of power as individuals through the purchasing part. So the bottoms up scenario, and by influencing who our government officials are that support what we do, and that's through the election process. So I think that's where individuals can participate directly in the process more than anything.
All right, and our next audience question. What gives you the most hope for the future of the climate movement?
Young people.
I was just getting ready to say.
So staying on that, what are some actions that young people can take, not only like through voting? I mean, if people are under the age of 18, what are the everyday habits that they can change? I know we talked a little about this, like recycling, What are some other examples that people can, some actions that they can take?
You know,
Um,
I'd like, oh, go ahead, Karine.
Well, no, I wanted to let you know that when I moved here to Houston from College Station, I noticed that, for example, here, we don't use too much bicycle. You don't use your bicycles to go to one place to other. And even when I saw students that they go to the high school, there's no roads, nothing for students that would like to use the bicycle. And I said, wow, I wanted to inspire. I came to the class to environmental science to start telling you what to do, because I did that for the I was teaching in Texas A&M 5 years, and I was using my bicycle every day. Okay, that was because you have to give the model. Okay, if I can just go earlier, it doesn't matter if it was raining or not, but I was exercising, and at the same time, that feeling, I'm polluting less. I'm using less my car because I can use my legs to use that. And I wanted to inspire my students to do that here in Houston, but they told me there is no way. One of my suggestions, as soon as you can, is request to the school, to the community, hey, can we just ride our bicycle if you live close to the school? And that will be like the first change. Maybe one school, and then other school will do the same. And can you imagine all the thousands of students making that change? Because if you see the amount of cars that are coming to the school every day, every student is with one car. Imagine that. I'm just suggesting one, because we were doing the recycling. We started doing the recycling in the high school, because I started our environmental awareness club. That is other thing. It could be happening in many schools. The environmental awareness, recycling, and also using that idea, no? Everybody with a bicycle. Like I used to see in other countries, okay? Especially in Europe, that is very common. Okay, so hope to see you next time with your bicycle.
I would invite you to join your local Audubon group. They're, the Audubon group is very welcoming, and probably the Isaac Walton groups are very welcoming to young people. I mean, I think you'd find a niche, and you'd find that people really listen and they would respect your input. You could probably change the focus of the whole organization with your energy.
Mhm. Yeah,
A very simple way would be, reduce, reuse, and recycle. So reduce the amount of resources utilized. The United States uses, 50% of the world's resources, with about 5% of the population in the planet. So if everybody in China used the same resources that we do, we would need like 30 planets to have enough resources for everybody. So we can do a lot by reducing what we use. We can reuse things for just, instead of using one thing once and throwing it away, you can use it 2 or 3 times. That helps the production chain and limits some of the greenhouse gas emissions and things like that. So, and of course, recycling is another big one. So, and of course, there's a million things. Use less water, use less fuel. You just think about it from reduce, reuse, and recycling. That helps you at least visualize a lot of the things that you do in your life.
And a really easy one is to try to take better care of your soil. And if you have a lawn, don't mow it so often. When people mow it every week or so, it actually weakens the grass and weakens the soil. So tell your parents to stop making you mow the lawn every week and go 2 or 3 weeks and let the grass grow, and the soil will be healthier and it'll store more carbon.
I was going to mention that too, along these lines, is that we have to identify who our target audience is, and there are many. But being able to not only show action, but to let other people know that you are taking action and that they can as well, is really key. And I know that in Rockport, this is largely a retirement community. And so a lot of the work that is done here, environmental work, is done by people that have actually moved here and then became very active in environmental projects, et cetera. When we have somebody, a young person, come to a meeting or come to a beach cleanup or something like that, it is just so great, because we're thinking, what if, what happens when we all can't be, out here doing this? And the other thing is that we don't tell the public enough about what groups are doing. So getting the word out via the traditional ways, which maybe here in Rockport would be the newspaper that they still get in print. It would be encouraging to get them to do that electronically, but also, all the other types of media that people use a lot. I mean, we use a lot of, Facebook for our particular audience and membership at the International Crane Foundation, but our young professionals are saying, no, it's not Facebook, it's Instagram, or it's, whatever it is. And the shorter the message, the better. And, the more impactful it is. So engaging people that are not only in the environmental sciences and natural resources, but people that are in communications, artists. Oh my gosh, what artists can do to get a message across. Forming these groups that have, people that are actually in different disciplines actually makes it stronger. Some people say, I don't want to talk on the TV, or I don't want to be interviewed, but somebody else can interview them and get that out, or be interviewed. So I think that we need to see the action, and that promotes more action.
Yes, I would definitely agree on like the social media aspect. A lot of young people, teenagers, the engagement on Instagram is definitely a lot higher. That's where they get a lot of their information from. We could see that like from the BLM movement, and of course this climate change movement. We see a lot of accounts that are posting information like climate science data, and they're making it so that it's easy to understand for like the average person that's not, a climate scientist. And that's definitely my goal through my Instagram. It's advocate for Earth, the number 4. I worked with a graphic designer to make, really eye-catching designs. And I also made sure to make the post really like short. So it's not, long paragraphs of information. It's really easy and digestible for anyone to understand and kind of get the main idea across.
Great.
Yes. So next question. In a few decades, what is the story that you think will be told about the climate crisis? Will it be one of resilience, innovation, or survival and defeat?
It has to be one, and it has to be positive. I think anytime negativity comes into play, or limitations, or someone saying that can't possibly happen, you have to turn that statement around, and you have to say it is going to happen. We just have to figure out how. I feel like other people need that hope, and then can become hopeful. So many of our leaders and our visionaries, they as we mentioned George Archibald. George is one of these people that can go into a crowd, and when he comes out, everybody wants to save cranes, and they didn't even know about a crane. What does he do? He tells them that there's hope, and that there's a future for the species, and that if that happens, then there's hope for us, and that for our communities, but that we have to think about what we're doing. And of course, he's saying, and if you'll, become a member of the Crane Foundation, we'll do the work. So sometimes people just want to be in some supporting, forward-thinking, organization. But I really feel like we can't even think the alternative. And we're right. It's a mess, and we've done it. And but that means that we've just got to, turn it around.
Yeah, and I mean, I agree entirely with that. And the solution is with us, and I hope that's what we're going to say in a few decades. One of the things I hear a lot, and I really support exploration of space, and I would love that to happen. But when we're talking about populating Mars because our Earth is so bad and degraded, and it's a lost cause, we're going to put a lot of resources to get into Mars and forget that we could have put those resources to make this planet more livable again. So it's a matter of focus. We can't give up, first of all, because we can do a lot of things, and everybody can do something. And so we can't be moving forward thinking, well, it's gone. Maybe in 20 years that might be the case, but we still have time, according to all the experts on climate, that we can turn that sharp increase, that sharp incline, but just by doing whatever we can. So I hope that is the message in the future.
All right. Next question.
Mariana,
Oh, yes.
Mariana, I wanted to introduce here, I have other scientists, Enrique Weir,
Oh, okay.
that he wants to say something, introduce yourself, and
Yes.
to make more comments about this wonderful virtual conference, okay? Like in the
All
future,
right.
okay?
Enrique.
Hello.
Introduce yourself.
Well, I am a system ecologist. I work with simulation models. I have been working during the last few years with the whooping cranes as well, but I have also experience in studies in South America where I was coordinator of a big program of biodiversity where we study all the ecosystem in mangroves in West Venezuela with the interest to establish patterns, establish a connection between different group species and help in some way to generate a management plan for all the ecosystem. In this same way, we were working in the last few years here, but in this sense, trying to work with saving some species and create conscience to the community and to the politician as well about problems that generate some energy alternative for some species that is currently endangered.
Okay, well, and just continue. If we have more questions, we have a few more minutes for this conference. In the future, remember what we said, this is the first virtual conference, and I hope that we will have many more, okay? This is our first, and as many other students, they were asking me, how many, when is gonna be the next? They couldn't make it today, Mariana, but I can tell you, many of my students were asking, when is gonna be the second? And I said, yes, this is just the first. We will generate like a certificate that you were here in the first. And it's not a joke. I said to the principal of the school, I said, Mariana Santos and all her team, because this is not only, she had a support of people, it's going to be kind of the equivalent to the Greta that is in Sweden, and she started her movement. Well, we have our other Greta, we have Mariana, okay? And I hope that will be the same impact. And one of the things is that as a positive way to see how we are making changes. I remember when I was working for the Crane Trust, and I was having that feeling that, okay, it's like it's a small group. We need to do something more. That's when I was invited to teach in Blinn College and Texas A&M. I saw the opportunity like a big window to contact so many students. And now I have my account. My account is more than 1,000 students touched with the concern of the environment and the whooping cranes, and the whooping cranes connected to you and your family and your community and your schools. That is what's kind of my path, no? What else can I do to reach more people? And I'm so happy that more than 1,000 students now have that connection, no, to what we are doing. And I hope many more will be inspired like you. For me to see that one single student is the generator of this event, I feel like, wow, I made it. Huh? Let's see what other things will happen. But if 1,000 were already in contact and they know what is happening here, I hope that this is something. And you will multiply everything.
Yes, of course. That is the hope that everyone who attended here, knows family, friends that they can also share this information with, and share what they learned here, and kind of influence their actions in regards to climate change. So regarding, a lot of y'all are mentioning like influencing our legislators and people in politics. So this next question is kind of related to that. How can we ensure that the government takes action and commits to a carbon neutral economy by 2030 or 2050?
Well, it starts with speaking up. That's what I work with members of Congress and their staff on a lot of our agricultural efforts. And I can tell you they listen a lot more to you than they listen to those lobbyists. And yes, they hear from the lobbyists and they're there every day, but what they really tune into, whether they're members of Congress or state legislators, city council members, they listen to the people in their district. They listen to the people in their hometowns when they tell them things. And so if you speak up and speak out, write them a letter, call their office, see if you can get a meeting with them, bring a couple friends to the meeting, write to your local newspaper, get on Facebook or Instagram or Pinterest, but do what you can and speak up and speak out and encourage your friends to do the same. And the more you can contact those public officials and let them know what you expect them to do, and the more of us who are doing that, the more they'll listen. And I think we really have seen a change in the last few years. You may not see it always out. You may not see it, but if you're in DC, I do see it. And in the last several years, we've seen a change in the way people on Capitol Hill are talking about climate change. And the people who deny it's happening are a lot quieter now, and they're still there. But the people who are looking for solutions are a lot, there's a lot more of them. And I think there's a lot more people who are saying, okay, yeah, we get it. It's a problem. I guess we need to deal with it. And that's because they've been hearing from people back home who've said, this is a problem, we need to deal with it. So speak up and speak out.
Yes, that's a great message. Thank you. So we have a couple of more audience questions. Will it ever be too late to reverse the damage done to the environment?
Well, according to the IPCC report, if we get to past the 1.5 degree increase in the next few years, it will be too late to reverse a lot of things. Maybe not everything, but so that's why this last report is really laying the groundwork that we have to act quick and fast, because if we get past that point, there's some things will be irreversible. think about sea level rise. So you can't go back there, for example. So there's some things that just get to another level and they will stay there. And they talk about 12 years being that kind of cutoff point at this point in time.
Okay, another question. What's the importance of biodiversity and some, I guess, like really important ecosystems that kind of determine the climate and are just, I guess, tipping points? So for example, like mangroves or wetlands, what role do they play and how do they impact us in the environment?
Well, when we study ecosystems in general, and mainly in big forest, one of the, or many of the historical study has been with the storage of energy and how the energy flow through all the ecosystem. But also talk about the function of the ecosystem in the ability to catch the carbon dioxide for the process of photosynthesis in the way that you keep many forests, you try to increase the forests in the natural areas, how was in the past. You are helping to the biosphere to restore the level of or condition in a little bit before that we have in this condition now. In the way when government decide to cut the forest, are helping to reduce the cycle of water, for example, cycle of energy, the cycle of nutrients that help to keep alive the biosphere in general. The trends, for example, in South America, has been trying to conserve some ecosystem because the importance that is still in this area for all the humankind. However, in this area, all the countries are on development, and the current trends is to reduce this kind of forest that used to be really big, and the last one that is in pristine condition. I believe that need to have a pressure of all the world to try to restore ecosystem, to keep areas as a pristine condition to help that and reduce or establish regulations in these areas and other areas around them that permit to restore some minimum condition that definitely will help to reduce the trend of the climate change.
Enrique is so right. Those, we talk about those rainforests as being kind of the lungs of the planet. And we see that in North America, our historic grasslands have been the lungs of North America. And when we destroy the grasslands or where we destroy those forests, it not only releases a lot of carbon up into the atmosphere, which makes things even worse, but it reduces the ability, because we no longer have those trees and those grasslands to suck all that carbon dioxide out of the air through photosynthesis and put it down into the soil where it belongs. And so protecting those ecosystems, protecting the grasslands, protecting the forests, protecting the wetlands. We talked about wetlands. They're only maybe 5 to 8% of the Earth's surface, but they store like 20 to 30% of the carbon in the soil is in those wetlands. So when we destroy those wetlands, we release a whole bunch of carbon, but we also take away, you know, what's an effective carbon storage mechanism. So really protecting those ecosystems is so important to the future health of our planet.
All right, thank you. So another question from the audience. What are some common misconceptions that people have about climate change?
That it isn't real or that we can't change it. And I think that, or that what can one person do? So I think those are, you know, three things that we have to turn around to a more collective, together we can, and here's what we need to do, and here's your small part. And I think that early on there was a book about how change occurs, and it was like, first do it in your home. As we've mentioned things here, it'd be great if people had easily available a list that says, what can we do at home? And then what can you do in your neighborhood? And then what can you do in your community? And those things just, you know, continue to build. And it's also measurable. I mean, it's really great to be able to, you know, cite that in this community there was no recycling, let's say. So people ended up recycling individually and then collectively went somewhere to turn it in. And then that led to the community saying, why are we doing this? Why don't we have it right here? And so, you know, being able to have some sort of guidance is really key. But I think that most people go, it's just too much for me. I can't, one person can't do it. And I think that's the biggest misconception.
I think another really big misconception is misconstruing climate with weather. And, you know, I've even heard politicians saying, well, how can the earth be warming up when I got this giant ball of ice that fell out of the sky the other day? And I think that it's one of the chat questions were related. Why is it global warming versus global warming is just an indicator of climate change. It's not the same thing. Because temperature change is the one that's the most significant change that we've seen in the last couple of decades or 4 decades. So that's one of the metrics for climate change. It's not the same thing. So we should not construe global warming as climate change. It's just an indicator of increasing temperature. The climate change is changing the patterns of rainfall, for example, are places that will not change very much, except that the amount of rainfall they get in 1 year is not going to fall in 2 days, which can lead to catastrophic events like flooding and washing out areas and things like that. So those are the changes that we need to focus on that are detrimental to potentially human health. It's not just warming that's going to be a difference, you know, because people just laugh at that. It's like, well, you know, what's 1 degree? You know, my house changes 10 degrees like every day, and I'm fine. There's nothing happening there. But we're talking about global temperature. It's not just when you look at the trend in the hottest days in the world in the last 10 years, or in the last 10 years have had 9 of the hottest years on record in the last 10 years. And 2020 apparently is going to be like 2nd or 3rd by the time we're done. So a lot of the changes are happening now. So we cannot you cannot tie climate to weather. It's very different. It's long-term versus immediate. And global warming should definitely not be equated with climate change. It's just one indicator of climate change.
Right, okay.
Yes, and it's also connected to the extreme conditions, extreme weather conditions, or extreme temperatures, or extreme cold temperatures. Okay, that is other thing that is happening more recurrent, extreme conditions, and it's when we see more impact in plants and in animals, and obviously in humans.
All right, thank you. So yeah, Liz, what you were saying about how that change kind of builds up, you know, from your own home into community. One of my posts on Instagram actually covers this, but some things that you can do in your house at first is, you know, what kind of pet owner you are. So making sure that your cat litter isn't made up of materials obtained by strip mining, right? Or how you use tick and flea pesticides, minimizing food waste, composting, making sure that your home has energy efficient windows so you can properly insulate. And then at stores, buying products like with sustainable palm oil, or consider dropping meat from meals. And then it goes on to how you can act as a citizen. And so definitely the common theme here has been contacting our representatives and making sure that they hear that we are concerned about these issues so that they can also you know, address them and start passing legislation that's has to do with environmental regulations and protecting and conserving our ecosystems. So thank you. Next, so we kind of touched a bit on global warming and like the global temperature, right? And that it needs to stay below 2 degrees. So right now, I think we're on track to reach 4 degrees by 2080. 2080. So what kind of things will we be seeing, I guess, in that time in the next 40 or 50 years as a result of climate change?
Everything, you know, just a list of the IPCC elements is like human health will be severely more significant at 2 degrees versus 1.5. That's why they keep coming up with that. Economic impacts are going to be, IPCC models risks at, you know, low, moderate, high, very high. And when they model 1.5 to 2 degrees, there are a lot of things that change. For example, threat systems go from high risk to very high just from the change from 1.5 to 2. Extreme weather events go from moderate to high risk from 1.5 to 2. The distribution of impacts worldwide transition from moderate to very high risk between 1.5 and 2. So I mean that, you know, when people say, well, it's just like a half a degree, well, it's going to have huge impacts. Economics are considered to be severely impacted when you just model at 1.5 versus 2. Human health, poverty issues are severely impacted even now, and every half degree disproportionately impacts, you know, areas of the world that are impoverished, and that's going to get worse and worse as these things go on. So there's a lot of things that have to do with human, social, economic structures that we need to think about besides just, and sometimes that's the best way to connect politicians and governments into understanding that human health, economics, and poverty issues are an integral part of climate, and that a small difference is going to have an impact in how people are going to live. Urban areas are severely impacted at 2 degrees versus 1.5, for example, moderate to very high. So, and of course, those are models, and we always say, you know, but it's very clear that we've been modeling now for several decades, and that it's been fairly good trends as far as what the results are compared to what's been modeled in the past. So we need to consider that a lot. So yes, half a degree makes a big difference, and we should keep that in mind. You know, we know that personally it doesn't affect us very much in our person, but it's going to potentially have very significant consequences outside.
And it may not seem like much, but when you think about it, so we looked at the models for 2050 for Grand Island, Nebraska, and said, how much does the summer temperature change? Is it expected to change over the next 30 years? And then we went and said, well, so now who has summers like that today? And what we found is that summers in Grand Island, Nebraska in 30 years will feel like summer in Sweetwater County, Texas by 2050. So that's a pretty huge change. In just a few years, the biggest crop right now in Grand Island in that area, Hall County, Nebraska, is corn. The biggest crop in Sweetwater County, Texas is cotton. So from an agricultural perspective, if you move that cotton belt 3 states north, and, think about that, and move the corn belt up into Canada, I mean, that's a huge change on the landscape in really a pretty short number of years. And you think about, all the other kinds of things that change from, habitat to agricultural production and everything else. I mean, it's huge. It's a huge change from what seems like pretty small numbers.
So that means Nebraska will be able to have a rattlesnake roundup in the future.
Yeah. I participated in one of those in Texas many years ago. Tasted pretty good.
And also we have to think at the aquatic level. With all the aquatic ecosystem, that just one little change in the temperature in the water can just change so many things at the invertebrate level. So that will be a big impact. So the fisheries economy will be changed totally, because that is one of the most important impacts. Temperature in the water can change even the gender of one of the blue crabs, for example. So pH, temperature can change many things in invertebrates. And then all the food chain will be altered, affected. So we have to be prepared for that.
Yes, of course. Okay. Is there anything else?
Yes, that is very critical. The increase of temperature in the past in some zones of the planet, like for example Peru, reduce some phenomena in this area, names upwelling. The upwelling of the famous Peruvian fisheries produced a crash in this area for many years. The increase of the temperature in some areas will reduce the capacity of the ecosystem to restore some resources in areas that commonly are generating in this way. The other element that is recurrently occurring in a high level is natural phenomena like hurricanes in a way that is incredible. For example, have you heard in some period recently that you have 2 hurricanes simultaneously in the Gulf of Mexico? Was the first time in the history that we have here experiment in this way. Have you heard in some moment that one hurricane passed through Central America in the past? No, this is the situation in this year. And this situation will increase in the future if we don't stop. Or I'm not sure if we will able to stop in this way. For other part, the process of the certification in some areas of the planet. Texas area, for example, is in the same parallel that Sahara Desert. The reduce of water availability in the future will increase the belt of deserts in this area of the planet. In the same way that the agriculture area will migrate to Canada, the certification will increase in lower state of the United States as well.
I'd like to follow up on that too, because here in the current wintering range of the whooping crane, there is 2 main rivers that supply the freshwater inflow into the San Antonio Bay system. And we had many meetings about how to recommend environmental flow standards that would be implemented by the state. Spent a lot of money, tons, getting these established, or hopefully were established. We had a very quiet man that was in the stakeholder group that was a commercial fisherman. And we went to lunch afterwards, a group of us, and we were a bunch of, NGOs going, man, yeah, talking little stuff. And he said, I want to understand climate change and I want to understand this water situation. He said, so in the future, with climate change, we're going to have more droughts, and we're going to have more infrequent but severe flooding. And we said, yeah. And he goes, haven't we done that anthropogenically now? Haven't we actually created climate change right here by the way that we're using our water? And so it really set us back, because it was like, if we want to plan what's going to happen in 30 years, we've already advanced ourselves there. And so to be able to say, if you want to be ready for change, we've already changed the system so much that it's impaired. And so I think that, you know, sometimes bringing in the fact about climate change as being a future reality, we've actually made it a reality in many, many ways. I think that, you know, oftentimes we get jolted back to the now, to say, what if we change so much that it's not going to make it? It's going to be very, very difficult to change that with continued climate change, and start to say, let's get our responsibilities back to now. So it's not discounting climate change. It's just saying we are exacerbating, as we started out this morning talking about.
All right, thank you for that. So as we're now wrapping up, I have one final question to kind of summarize what we talked about today, this morning. What is the main message you would like the audience to take away?
Mine to everybody here is like, you can make a big difference. So do what you can.
I think that's right. You can't, as Linda said, none of us can do it all, but it's going to take all of us together to make the kind of changes that we need in our individual lives, in our communities, in our country, and in the world, to put in place clean energy, to change our ag systems, to really retool our economies to change the world. And so we need all of you together, all of us.
And I would add to that, keep following the science, because then we'll make better decisions.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I would say that, you know, collectively we're stronger and have more opportunities, but also each one of us is unique, and we bring something special to the table. And so you are important in this whole collective opportunity to make a change. But when you're there, things become a little bit better and enhanced. So you are needed.
All right, thank you. So yeah, I think we are now finished. I would like to thank all of the panelists. I really appreciate you joining me here today to talk about climate change and address, you know, some solutions, and talk about what we can do as individuals and collectively as well to combat this crisis. And I also want to thank Dr. Gill for being such a huge inspiration. After taking her class in environmental science, I was a lot more intrigued and just motivated to do something and bring the conversation to people like in this Zoom panel. But yeah, thank you. I really appreciate all of you being here today. And I want to thank the audience for staying as well. And also the great questions that you asked really sparked some interesting conversation. So I hope you all learned something interesting, and you know, something that you can share with others, your friends and family as well, so we can get this communicated to our communities as well. So thank you.
Thank
We will
you.
send you invitation
Hi,
for
Jack.
the next Listen to the Earth Part 2, Conference 2. Okay, that will be a big conference. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.
You're
Thank
welcome,
you so
Mariana, and thanks a lot. You keep it up.
Yeah.
Yes.
Of course.
Thank you. Very inspirational. And Jack says so too.
You
Aw.
need to for
Jack.
I
There's
appreciate that. We
Jack. Hey, hey.
Yeah, he says, where's Felipe?
Ay, mira qué lindo.
Come see us.
Hey.
Yes.
Yeah.